Story 1. My parents were on their honeymoon in Key West. When they arrived at their hotel, they were originally assigned a non-smoking room. Since my dad was a smoker, they asked to be switched. They got a new room on a different floor. As they got off the elevator, the smell of fresh paint hit them hard. Down the hall, a painter was working, surrounded by his tools and supplies. As they passed, they greeted him, but he didn't respond, not even a glance. When they entered their room, the paint fumes were so intense it was unbearable. They turned right around and went to the front desk to ask for another switch. The front desk clerk looked confused. She told them no painting was scheduled for that floor. Still, she agreed to give them a new room. They went back upstairs to get their bags. But in the 10 minutes they'd been gone, the painter had vanished. Every drop cloth, every can, gone. And the smell of paint completely disappeared. They were creeped out but tried to shake it off. They moved into their new room and called it a night. The next morning, as they were heading to breakfast, they overheard a tour guide talking to a group about the hotel. They stopped listening in until he mentioned the exact floor they were supposed to stay on. He explained that years ago, a painter had fallen to his death down the elevator shaft on that floor. My parents don't normally believe in the paranormal, but after an event like this, that they had no explanation for it, freaked them out a good bit. Story 2. This happened back when I still had my fishing boat. It was one of the most terrifying experiences I've ever had, and I'll never forget it. My wife and I had set off from the East Coast for a 2-day fishing trip out on the North Atlantic. The first day and night went smoothly. We caught a decent haul, played cards at night, and listened to music. It was peaceful. The next night, things were different. After a slow day at sea, we were back inside playing cards again, this time without music. That's when we suddenly heard the hum of a boat engine. We rushed outside and saw a man in a run-down old motorboat, drifting silently with no lights on. He had stopped directly in front of us. He looked middle-aged, with a beard and a baseball cap. I approached and asked if he needed help. He said he was looking for spare gasoline. I apologized and told him we didn't have any. Then I asked if he was low on fuel and needed a tow back to shore, but he said no, he had plenty of gas. That didn't sit right with us. Why ask for gas if he had enough? The silence that followed was unnerving. He just stared at us, expressionless, his face faintly lit by our deck light, while everything else was swallowed in darkness. Eventually, he broke the silence by asking how our catch had been. I told him it wasn't great, still trying to stay polite despite how strange it all felt. I then asked how he was navigating without lights. He just chuckled, like I had made a joke. Without another word, he turned his boat and drifted off into the pitch black. My wife and I were thoroughly creeped out. She whispered that she thought he was planning to rob us. As a fisherman, I'm used to chatting with other boaters, but something about this guy was just off. He came up to us so late, far from shore, alone, and acted so strangely. It didn't sit well. I turned off our lights and moved our boat north to make sure he couldn't track us. Later that night, around 2 a.m., I was jolted awake by my wife's blood-curdling scream. I shot up and saw a man standing right at the foot of our bed. I lunged, but he bolted out before I even hit the floor. Seconds later, I heard that same motorboat fire up and speed off into the darkness. We didn't hesitate. We sailed straight back to shore and reported what happened. But, of course, we never heard another word about it. To this day, we have no idea what he wanted, or what might have happened if we hadn't woken up in time. The thought still haunts me. Story 3. It was the first time my family had ever gone camping together. I was 18. Honestly, we probably wouldn't have gone at all if it weren't for my 11-year-old twin siblings, my little brother and sister. It was mid-July and I was actually looking forward to it. We drove deep into the countryside. Instead of a designated campground, my dad just parked on the side of a quiet road and we hiked a mile into the woods. We found a small clearing and pitched 2 tents, one for my parents and one for me and my siblings. That night, I just couldn't sleep. Lying in a sleeping bag felt like trying to sleep directly on the ground. I kept tossing and turning, trying to get comfortable. My little brother and sister had been asleep for a long time. Then I heard the zipper to our tent slowly sliding down. I looked up and saw a head poke inside. I couldn't tell who it was. "Dad?" I whispered. The person pulled back out without saying anything. "Dad?" I said again, louder. But they were already walking away and the tent was left half open. Confused, I climbed out and went to check on my parents. I unzipped their tent and crawled in. They were both fast asleep in their sleeping bags. I shook my dad awake and asked if he had just come over to our tent. He said no. I hoped it had been my mom, but when I woke her up, she groggily told me she hadn't moved either. That's when the realization hit me. Someone else had opened our tent. A stranger. Maybe worse. I don't remember if my parents took me seriously, but I do remember lying awake the rest of the night, unable to shake the terror of what could have happened. Story 4. It was a dark and stormy night, the kind I actually enjoy. Thunder rumbling, lightning flashing. I decided to stay up late watching movies. I lived with my dad, but he was working the night shift, so I was home alone. After finishing Forrest Gump for probably the 100th time, I figured 2 a.m. was a good time to head to bed. I always liked falling asleep to the sound of a storm. But just as I started to drift off, something hit my window. It didn't sound like rain. It was more like a solid tap. I ignored it at first, but then it happened again. A rock. Definitely a rock. My heart started pounding. It couldn't be my dad. He'd have called if something was wrong. Another rock, then another. Whoever was outside knew I was up there. They could have seen the TV light just turn off. I tried to stay frozen, hoping they'd go away. But then the rain began to ease, and I heard an engine idling down on the street. A much louder thud hit the window. That was it. I jumped out of bed, heading to the phone. As I passed the front door, I saw something through the glass at the top. A face, grinning. I sprinted to the kitchen, grabbed the phone, and called the police. They said an officer was nearby. Whoever was at the door started jiggling the handle, then ramming it, trying to break in. I yelled that the police were coming, grabbed a knife, and bolted back upstairs. A minute later, the banging stopped. No more rocks. I didn't dare look outside. Eventually, I heard the truck drive off. Minutes later, sirens wailed and the doorbell rang. I told the officer everything, described the face as best I could, but I hadn't seen the truck. Still regret not looking. There was never enough information for the cops to find whoever it was. To this day, I don't know if they were just trying to rob me or something worse. Story 5. This didn't happen to me, but to my cousin Nikki. And even now, thinking about it gives me the creeps. Sam was on Skype with his girlfriend Nikki around 1 a.m. on a Friday night. She was trying to convince him to come over and spend the night, but he wasn't in the mood to drive that late. While they were talking, Nikki noticed the door to her closet crack open slightly. He pointed it out, and Sam glanced back at it, but they both brushed it off. Another 30 minutes passed. Then the closet door creaked open a bit more. Nikki mentioned it again, teasing her that her little brother was probably hiding in there. She shook her head and said the window was open, maybe a draft or something. Then, a while later, the closet door swung fully open and someone stepped out, walked right out of the room. Nikki didn't even react. Sam, startled, asked her if it was her brother again. What she said next chilled him to the bone. She told him she was home alone. He immediately started yelling for her to lock the door and call the police. She didn't seem to understand at first, but then she turned, saw the open closet, and screamed. She slammed and locked the door. Sam jumped in his car, calling 911 as he sped to her house. When he arrived, the front door was wide open. He rushed in and knocked on Nikki's door, but she didn't answer. The police got there soon after. They broke the door down and found her curled up in the corner, in shock. She later said she had seen someone standing right in her doorway, face to face, before she slammed it shut.